The galaxy had a word for what humans carried inside them. The Selvari called it Velshara, the unshedding. The Torani called it brain rot. The diplomatic term, used in concordance documents and medical journals across 400 systems, was the human scar. It meant this: humans could not forget the people they loved. Not in the way other species meant could not forget. Every sentient race remembered things. The difference was surgical. A Selvari could take a memory, a face, a voice, 11 weeks on a dead moon and lock it inside a sealed partition in their crystalline brain architecture. Archived, inaccessible, gone in every way that mattered while the body kept breathing. The Torani had chemical pruning. The Velasi had dream shedding. Every species in the known galaxy had evolved or engineered a way to put down what they could not carry. Humans had nothing. They just carried it. Every face, every loss, every hand they had held in the dark. It went into their tissue like shrapnel, and it stayed there, and they got up in the morning and made coffee and went to work with all of it still humming inside their bones. The galaxy found this horrifying. Commander Kale Marin found it irrelevant. He had not been selected for the Axis Meridian Diplomatic Summit because of his emotional profile. He had been selected because of the absence of one. His file read like a redacted obituary. 38 years old, no living family, no registered partner, no active social bonds above a 0 0.3 on the Concordance Attachment Index. His psychological evaluation described him as operationally optimal and emotionally non-reactive, which were military phrases for a man who had learned to swallow his own weather. Earth's delegation to the summit was small. Ambassador Vera Tosk handled the politics, a sharp woman in her 50s with silver-threaded locks and the kind of smile that made people forget she was dismantling their arguments. Kale handled security. 3 junior officers handled everything else. Humanity was still the galaxy's youngest spacefaring species, and the Concordance treated Earth's diplomatic presence the way adults treated a child who had wandered into a board meeting, with patience, condescension, and the quiet hope that it would not touch anything important. Kale did not mind being underestimated. Underestimated people were not watched, and unwatched people could work. Axis Meridian was a neutral station the size of a small city, hanging in the gravitational null between 3 star systems. It smelled like recycled air and political compromise. Kale moved through its corridors the way he moved through most spaces, cataloging exits, reading sight lines, noting which species flinched at eye contact, and which ones held it like a dare. He ate alone in the human delegation's quarters, slept in controlled 2-hour intervals, ran his perimeter checks at 400 and 1600 station time with the regularity of a man who had replaced ritual with routine, because ritual implied something to believe in. He kept one personal item, a disc of Selvari crystal, no larger than an old earth coin, pale violet and worn smooth at the edges. It lived in the inner pocket of his uniform jacket, directly over his sternum. He touched it once that first morning, 2 fingers light, the way a person touches a scar to confirm it has not reopened. He did not touch it again. Ambassador Vera noticed things. It was her job to notice things, and she was exceptional at her job in ways that made her staff vaguely nervous. She noticed that Kale had memorized the station's full schematic within 6 hours of boarding. She noticed that he avoided the observation deck on Meridian's upper ring, the one with the panoramic viewport that opened onto raw, unfiltered starfield. She noticed that he slept with his boots on and his door unlocked, which was either a tactical choice or the habit of a man who had stopped believing walls would hold. She noticed that when the summit agenda was distributed and the Selvari Dominion's delegation roster was listed, Kale read it twice. His face did nothing. His hand went to his chest. Then he set the datapad down and asked about catering logistics for the opening reception. Vera filed this away. She was building a theory, and the theory had teeth. The summit existed, because the galaxy was afraid. The Torani Collective, young, expanding, hungry in the way that empires were hungry when they had just learned how big the table was, had been pushing into a sector of space the Selvari considered sacred. The resonance wells, natural phenomena buried in the crust of dead moons and gas giant cores, where vibrations at specific frequencies could amplify Selvari crystalline biology. Their bones sang in those places. Their cognitive architecture deepened. Their memory partitions became sharper, stronger, more absolute. The wells were not just resources. They were the infrastructure of Selvari consciousness. The Torani wanted them for energy extraction. The Selvari saw this as an existential threat dressed in economic language. 60 years of uneasy peace between the two powers had begun to fracture along this single fault line, and the Concordance had called the summit to hold the cracks shut before it became a canyon. Earth held a swing vote on the Concordance Council, a meaningless vote in most circumstances. The newcomer species, the emotional ones, the ones who still killed each other over territorial lines drawn on single planets. But in a deadlocked council, meaningless votes became kingmakers. Kale understood all of this. He also understood what his superiors had not said aloud, that Earth's presence here was not about peace. It was about leverage, and leverage required a steady hand. His hand was steady. It had been steady for 10 years. The Selvari delegation arrived on the third day. Kale was positioned in the atrium, standard security overwatch, high ground, clear sight lines to every entrance. He watched the delegation file through the main corridor with the professional detachment of a man observing weather patterns. Selvari were tall, sharp-angled, their bones threaded with crystalline structures that caught light and refracted it into pale luminescence. They moved like cathedral architecture had learned to walk. The delegation's lead representative stepped through the atrium doors last. She was taller than he remembered, or maybe she had always been that tall and he had been standing closer. Her bioluminescence was a controlled ivory white, diplomatic register, emotionally neutral, the Selvari equivalent of a pressed suit and a handshake. Her crystalline bone structure had matured, the angles of her face sharper now, more defined, carrying the kind of authority that came from years of being obeyed. He did not recognize the face. The face had changed. But something in the way she moved through a room, like gravity was a suggestion she was choosing to accept, hadn't. Kale's hand found the crystal disc in his pocket. His fingers closed around it. His knuckles went white against the inside of his jacket. 47 floors below, in a conference room being prepared for the next day's session, someone arranged name placards on a circular table. 2 of them were placed directly across from each other. Commander Kale Marin, Earth Delegation. Princess Salith Vorana, Selvari Dominion. The distance between the placards was exactly 1.3 meters. It was not enough. It was also far too much. The formal introductions took 11 minutes. Kale counted. Counting was a thing he did when his body needed a task that wasn't feeling. Each delegation presented its lead representatives to the Concordance mediator, a Velisi elder with 6 arms and the patient expression of someone who had arbitrated wars before breakfast. Names were spoken, titles recited, diplomatic credentials verified through bioluminescent handshake protocols that allowed each species to confirm the other's identity at a biochemical level. When it was Kale's turn, he stepped forward, stated his name and rank, and offered the standard human greeting, eye contact, open palms, a nod. The Concordance mediator acknowledged him with one of her 6 hands and moved on. When it was Salith's turn, she stepped forward with the precision of something engineered rather than born. Her bioluminescence held its ivory-white diplomatic register without a single fluctuation. She stated her name, her title, her authority to negotiate on behalf of the Selvari Dominion's ruling clade. Her gaze swept the room. It passed over Kale the way light passes over furniture. Nothing. Not a flicker, not a pause, not the smallest hitch in the rhythm of her movement. She looked at him and saw exactly what his credentials said he was, a mid-ranking human military officer attached to an irrelevant delegation. Cale's face did nothing in return. They were two professionals in a room full of professionals. The air between them was perfectly, surgically empty. He went back to his quarters that night and sat on the edge of his bed with his boots still on. The crystal disc was in his hand. He did not remember taking it out of his pocket. His thumb moved across its surface in a pattern that was not random, 3 slow circles, then a pause, then 3 more. It was a Selvari greeting, a private one, the kind shared between people who had seen each other's unguarded faces in low light. He closed his fist around it, put it back, pulled off his boots, lay down. The third hour of sleep came and went. He did not dream, because dreaming required letting go of the steering wheel, and Cale Marin had not let go of anything in 10 years. Operation Midnight Garden had never officially existed. The mission files were buried under 17 layers of classification, sealed by Joint Human-Selvari Intelligence Authority, and marked with the kind of codes that meant anyone who accessed them without authorization would disappear into a bureaucratic void so deep that even their dental records would forget them. Cale knew what was in those files because he had lived them. 10 years ago, a dead moon called Verath 9, orbiting a brown dwarf in a system the Torani had claimed and the Selvari had contested. Intelligence had identified a rogue Torani weapons installation hidden beneath the moon's surface, a facility developing resonance-based weaponry that could shatter Selvari crystalline biology at a molecular level, the kind of weapon that turned a species' own bodies into the instrument of their destruction. The mission was small by design: 4 Selvari intelligence operatives, 2 human combat specialists, 11 weeks of covert insertion, surveillance, and eventual neutralization of the facility. No support, no extraction plan, no official record. Cale had been 28. His partner, the Selvari operative assigned to work directly with him, was a young intelligence officer whose real identity was classified even from the rest of the team. She was sharp, curious, and possessed the rare Selvari trait of finding humans genuinely interesting rather than pitiable. She asked him questions about memory the way a scientist asks questions about an alien atmosphere, with fascination and faint horror. How do you carry all of it? Where does it go? Does it not crush you? He had not known she was a princess. He had known her as a voice in the dark, a mind that matched his in the field, a presence that made the dead moon's silence feel less like emptiness and more like a room they shared. 11 weeks. At the end, the facility was destroyed. 2 Selvari operatives were killed. Cale took injuries that left scars along his ribs and a persistent tremor in his left hand that he had since trained into stillness. And the young intelligence officer, his partner, his counterpart, the person who had pressed a pale violet crystal into his palm on the 9th week and said nothing because the gesture said everything, was listed in the final report as killed in action. He had mourned her the only way humans knew how, by absorbing it into his living tissue and continuing to breathe. She had not died. Cale did not know the details. He did not know when or how the Selvari Dominion had recovered her, or what political machinery had ground into motion to erase her from the mission record and resurrect her under her true identity. He knew only what he could see, that Princess Salith Vorana was alive, was standing in rooms he was also standing in, and was looking through him like glass. The Selvari called it Velcora, the ceiling, a memory partition so complete that the archived experiences became cognitively inaccessible, not suppressed, not forgotten, walled off. The memory still existed inside Salith's crystalline architecture, encoded in molecular lattice structures that would outlast her physical body by centuries. But she could not reach them. They were a locked room inside her own mind, and the key had been dissolved. In Selvari culture, this was considered the highest form of emotional hygiene, a mercy, a gift of clarity in the aftermath of contamination. The contamination in this case was Kale. A Selvari princess had allowed a human past her memory partitions, had shared unguarded cognition with a species that the Dominion considered emotionally radioactive. The political implications alone would have been enough to topple a ruling clade. The personal implications, a Selvari consciousness exposed to the full, unfiltered weight of human emotional bonding, were considered a form of psychological injury. So they had sealed him away inside her, locked the door, dissolved the key, and sent her back into the world clean, composed, and diplomatically functional. She did not know she was missing 11 weeks of her life. She did not know the human across the conference table had once held the other half of her unguarded mind. The first joint session of the summit was held in a circular chamber designed to ensure no delegation sat higher than another. Kale stood behind Ambassador Vera's chair, arms folded, posture neutral. Salith sat directly across the table, flanked by Selvari advisors whose bioluminescence pulsed in coordinated patterns of diplomatic signaling. The session was procedural: agenda items, speaking order, rules of engagement for disputed topics. Kale tracked the room with professional focus, nodding the Torani delegate who kept touching his earpiece, the Velasi mediator's subtle arm movements that indicated shifting patience, the small tremor in the station's atmospheric processors that suggested a maintenance issue on the lower decks. His observations were precise, thorough, reliable. Except that twice in 90 minutes, his gaze returned to the specific wavelength of Salith's bioluminescence. Ivory white, controlled, emotionally sealed. He catalogued it as a security observation. It was not a security observation. Ambassador Vera caught him in the corridor afterward. She fell into step beside him with the practiced ease of a woman who had been cornering people in hallways for 30 years. "That file," she said, "the one with the classification codes that practically glow in the dark." Kale kept walking. "Which file?" "The one I'm not supposed to know about." She matched his pace. "The Dead Moon, the joint operation, the Selvari operative listed as KIA who is currently sitting across from us with a princess title and a memory partition so thick I can almost see the seams." He stopped, turned, looked at her. Vera met his gaze. She did not flinch, because Ambassador Vera Tosk had negotiated with warlords and found them easier to read than this man. "Are you compromised?" she asked. "No," Kale said. The word came out like a door closing, clean, final, load-bearing. Vera studied him for a long moment, then she nodded once and walked away. It happened on the fourth day. A structural panel in the secondary corridor came loose, a maintenance failure, nothing more, a bolt sheared by thermal cycling. It swung downward from the ceiling in a long, heavy arc directly above the Selvari delegation's lead representative. Kale's body moved, not his mind. His mind was 3 steps behind, still processing the sound of shearing metal. But his body, his scarred, sleepless, shrapnel-carrying body, was already there, already between the panel and the princess, already absorbing the impact across his raised forearm and shoulder with the practiced geometry of a man who had once spent 11 weeks keeping this specific person alive. The panel clattered to the floor. Kale stepped back. His arm throbbed. Salith looked at him. For 1/2 second, less than a heartbeat, less than a breath, her bioluminescence strobed a color he had no name for. Not ivory white, not any diplomatic register, something raw and deep and violet-edged, like a door rattling against a lock that was supposed to be permanent. Then it was gone. Ivory white returned. Diplomatic composure settled back over her like water filling a glass. "Thank you, Commander," she said. Formal, correct, empty. She walked away. Kale stood in the corridor with a bruising arm and a crystal disc humming against his chest, and he thought about partitions, about walls built inside minds, about the Selvari belief that any memory could be sealed away completely, permanently, without remainder. He touched his sternum, 3 slow circles, a pause, 3 more. Somewhere behind her sealed walls, in a room she did not know existed, something was listening. The summit broke on the 6th day. Not slowly, the way diplomatic failures usually unfolded, the careful erosion of trust over weeks of circular language. This was a detonation. Someone leaked intelligence to every delegation simultaneously. Classified sensor data suggesting the Selvari had been secretly weaponizing the resonance wells, converting sacred sites into military installations, building the very kind of weapons that Operation Midnight Garden had been designed to prevent. The accusation was a grenade thrown into a room full of people holding open flames. The Torani delegation erupted. Their lead negotiator, a broad-shouldered officer named Vasek who had the diplomatic subtlety of a thrown chair, stood up in the middle of the session and formally accused the Selvari Dominion of treaty violation. The Selvari advisor's bioluminescence shifted to deep crimson, which Kale recognized as the equivalent of a species-wide threat display. The Velisi mediator raised 4 of her 6 arms in a calming gesture that nobody was calm enough to respect. Vera pulled Kale into a side corridor, while the chamber descended into controlled chaos. "The intelligence is fabricated," Kale said before she could ask. She raised an eyebrow. "You're certain?" "The signal encoding is wrong. Whoever manufactured this data used Torani military formatting, but the compression artifacts are third-party. This didn't come from Torani intelligence. It came from someone who wanted it to look like it did." Vera's eyes narrowed. She was doing the math, the political math, the kind that calculated leverage in units of timing and silence. "If we can prove that." Earth goes from swing vote to kingmaker. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had just realized her scalpel was sharper than she thought. "What do you need?" "Access to the Torani military relay satellite in the Verath system. The original communication logs will show the fabrication chain." He paused. "It's a covert operation. Small team. Deniable." "Like Midnight Garden," Vera said. Kale's jaw tightened. A small movement, the kind most people would miss. Vera was not most people, but she let it pass. The Concordance declared a 72-hour recess. Delegations retreated to their quarters. Security details doubled. The station's atmosphere took on the pressurized quality of a room where everyone was holding their breath and pretending they weren't. Kale spent 4 hours building a threat analysis and 6 hours trying not to think about who had manufactured the leaked intelligence. Because the signal encoding wasn't just third-party. It carried a specific operational fingerprint, one he recognized from a dead moon, 10 years ago, in a facility that was supposed to have been destroyed along with everyone inside it. Someone from Midnight Garden's target list had survived. And they knew exactly which buttons to push. The intelligence sharing session was Vera's idea. Joint security assessment between the 2 delegations most likely to be targeted by the fabrication, Earth and the Selvari. Logical, diplomatically sound, completely routine. Vera scheduled it in a small conference room on Meridian's lower ring. 2 chairs, 1 table, no aides. The room was barely 10 meters square. Kale arrived first. He arranged his datapad, 2 backup drives, and a signal analysis toolkit on the table's surface with the precision of a man building a wall out of equipment. The more objects between him and the empty chair across the table, the better. Salith arrived exactly on time. She entered the room the way she entered every room, as though the space had been designed for her and was only now fulfilling its purpose. Her bioluminescence held steady at ivory white. Her crystalline features carried no expression that human neurology could parse. She sat down, opened her own datapad, looked at him with the professional courtesy of a stranger. "Commander Marin, I understand we are to cross-reference signal intelligence regarding the leaked data." "That's correct, Princess Vorana." Her title in his mouth tasted like someone else's language. He swallowed it and opened the first data file. They worked for 2 hours. It was, on the surface, a flawless professional collaboration. Two intelligence-trained operatives dissecting fabricated data with surgical efficiency. Kale identified the signal compression anomalies. Salith mapped the distribution pattern, how the leak had reached each delegation simultaneously through supposedly independent channels. Together, they built an evidence chain that was methodical, airtight, and completely devastating to whoever had orchestrated the provocation. Beneath the surface, something else was happening. It started small. Salith used a tactical shorthand, a specific notation for marking compromised communication nodes that was not standard Selvari military protocol. Kale recognized it because he had invented it. On Verath 9, during the 6th week, he had taught it to his Selvari counterpart in a maintenance tunnel while they waited for a patrol to pass overhead. Salith used it without hesitation, without recognition, without any indication that she knew where it came from. It had leaked through her partition like water through hairline cracks in stone. Kale said nothing. His hand found the crystal disc in his pocket, 3 circles, pause, 3 more. 20 minutes later, she did it again. A different shorthand, a different ghost. She referenced a signal analysis technique that existed in no Selvari training manual because it was a hybrid method, half human pattern recognition, half Selvari crystalline frequency mapping, that 2 operatives had developed together over 11 weeks because neither species' approach was sufficient alone. She used it like it was hers, because it was. She just didn't know how she'd learned it. The cracks were spreading. At the 2-hour mark, Salith stopped typing. Her hands went still on the datapad. Her bioluminescence, steady ivory white for 6 days without interruption, flickered. Not a diplomatic fluctuation, not a controlled shift in register. A stutter. Like a light with a failing connection, something inside her pulsed and went dark and pulsed again in a color that didn't belong to the ivory white spectrum. A deep, raw violet. The same color that had strobed for half a second in the corridor when Kale had shielded her from the falling panel. She stared at her own hands, as if they had done something without permission. Commander Marin. Her voice was different, still controlled, but the control was costing something now. Kale could hear the price in the spaces between her words. I find myself using analytical methods I cannot account for in my training record. My cognitive architecture is producing references I cannot source. She looked up at him. Her eyes were Selvari, crystalline, multifaceted, designed to process light in spectrums humans couldn't see. But something behind them was reaching through the crystal like a hand pressing against glass from the inside. Something sealed. Something that had been listening to the sound of his voice for 2 hours and was now throwing itself against the walls of its cage. Do you remember me, human? The word landed like a bullet. Not commander, not Marin, human. The way she had said it on Verath 9 in the dark in the maintenance tunnels in the 11th week when titles had become absurd and formality had become a joke between 2 people who had seen each other's unguarded faces. Half teasing, half wondering, an entire relationship compressed into 2 syllables. She didn't know why she'd said it. He could see the confusion fracturing her composure. The word had come from the sealed room, had slipped through a crack she couldn't locate, and now it was in the air between them and she didn't know what it meant. He knew what it meant. His body knew what it meant. Kale Marin's legs stopped working. Not dramatically, not with a sound. His knees simply unlocked and his body dropped, chair pushed back, hands catching the table edge, weight folding downward like a building whose foundation had just received the one vibration it was never designed to absorb. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. His training caught him before he hit the floor, arms braced, core engaged. He pulled himself upright through muscle memory and 10 years of discipline and the pure animal refusal to be horizontal in a room where he could not afford to be anything less than vertical. He stood, straightened his jacket, placed both hands flat on the table. His hands were shaking. He let them shake. There was no point pretending they weren't because she had seen, and his knees had already told the truth his mouth never would. Salith stared at him. Her bioluminescence was cycling, ivory to violet to something deeper, something he had no name for, a color that Selvari light was not supposed to produce. Her cognitive architecture was trying to process what she had just witnessed. A human male, trained, disciplined, combat-hardened. Brought to his knees by 2 words from a woman, whose memories of him were supposed to be locked in a room without a key. She did not understand what she was seeing. She understood it completely. Both things were true. The sealed room inside her mind was shaking. The walls held, but the walls were humming now, vibrating at a frequency that matched the crystal disk in his pocket, and for the first time in 10 years the partition was not silent. "I'm fine," Kale said. His voice was level, his hands were not. Salith opened her mouth, closed it. Her bioluminescence settled not back to ivory white, not back to diplomatic neutral, but to something new. A low, steady violet that pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat she did not technically have. She looked down at her datapad. He looked down at his. They resumed the signal analysis. Neither of them mentioned what had happened. The room was 10 meters square and full of ghosts, and they worked inside it with the desperate precision of 2 people building a boat in a flood. She asked if he remembered. The answer was in his knees. The Torani relay satellite hung in orbit above Verath 9 like a steel splinter lodged in the dark. Below it, the dead moon turned its scarred face toward the brown dwarf it circled, and somewhere beneath that surface lay the ruins of a weapons facility that 2 species had conspired to erase from history. Kale stood in the airlock of a borrowed shuttle, checking his equipment for the 3rd time. Pulse pistol, signal extraction drive, breaching charges. A compact rebreather unit rated for 6 hours of operation in compromised atmosphere. Behind him, Salith was doing the same. He had argued against her presence. Argued is too gentle a word. He had laid out 9 tactical objections with the cold precision of a man presenting evidence at a court-martial. She was a political asset. Her capture would be catastrophic. Her crystalline biology was vulnerable to the satellite's electromagnetic security grid. Her role in the summit made her indispensable to the negotiations that would follow. Salith had listened to all 9 objections with the patience of someone counting raindrops, and then she had informed him that she was coming, and that his objections, while tactically sound, were irrelevant. Her exact words, "You need a Selvari operative who can read Torani crystalline encryption. I am the only Selvari operative on this station. Mathematics solves your problem, Commander." The mathematics were correct. Kale hated the mathematics. Vera had approved the operation with the kind of careful enthusiasm that politicians used when they saw an opportunity wrapped in a risk. 3 additional operators, 2 human marines and 1 Selvari intelligence officer, rounded out the team. Small, fast, deniable. The shape of the mission was familiar in ways Kale's body recognized before his mind did. Verath System, Joint Team, no official record. Midnight Garden again. The satellite's exterior was industrial, Torani military design favored function over form, and the relay station was a bristling mass of communication arrays and armored hull plating. Kale's team breached through a maintenance port on the station's ventral side, cutting through the hull with plasma torches, and dropping into a service corridor that smelled like ozone and recycled coolant. They moved in pairs. The 2 Marines took point. The Selvari intelligence officer monitored their communications. Kale and Salith fell into formation together without discussion, without coordination, without a single word exchanged about positioning or spacing. They didn't need words, their bodies remembered. His stride adjusted to her longer gait. Her movement anticipated his pauses at corridor junctions. When he raised a fist to signal a hold, she was already stopping. When she tilted her head to indicate a frequency anomaly in the station's electromagnetic field, he was already adjusting his scanning equipment. 11 weeks on a dead moon. The muscle memory was a decade old, and it moved through them like current through copper, instant, effortless, alive. The first sign that something was wrong came 40 minutes into the operation. The satellite was not defended by Torani military personnel. The guards they encountered wore mismatched armor bearing the insignia of the Pale Circuit, a black market network that Kale knew by reputation and Salith knew by the way her bioluminescence went cold when she saw the symbol. Memory traders, she said. The words were flat, hard. Kale understood. The Pale Circuit dealt in one commodity, memory itself. They had found a way to extract, duplicate, and sell the partition technology that the Selvari considered the most sacred aspect of their cognitive architecture. Sealed memories, archived experiences, quarantined traumas, locked away loves, pulled from Selvari minds and sold to the highest bidder. Intelligence agencies, blackmailers, collectors of other people's private agonies. The mission's shape changed. This was not a Torani military installation. This was a Pale Circuit vault. They pressed deeper. The vault was in the satellite's core, behind 3 layers of electromagnetic shielding that would have cooked a human nervous system at full power. Kale's team disabled the outer 2 layers with breaching charges. The Selvari intelligence officer handled the third with a crystalline frequency override that made the air taste like copper and static. Inside the vault, servers, rows of them, humming with the low vibration of stored data. Kale plugged in his extraction drive and began pulling the Torani communication logs, the evidence they needed to prove the summit provocation was fabricated. While the data transferred, Salith moved through the server rows with the focused intensity of someone reading gravestones. Her crystalline fingers brushed the surface of each server housing, reading the molecular signatures embedded in the storage medium. She stopped at the 14th row. Her bioluminescence went completely dark. In 10 years of Selvari diplomatic interactions, Kale had never seen that. Selvari light was autonomic. It didn't shut off any more than a human heart stopped beating voluntarily. For Salith's bioluminescence to go dark meant her cognitive architecture had encountered something so overwhelming that it had pulled every available resource inward, away from secondary functions, into the processing of a single, catastrophic realization. Salith, her name, not her title, his mouth chose before his brain could intervene. "They have me," she said. "My partition, my sealed archive, it's here." Kale went still. The sealed room, the locked away 11 weeks, every memory of Verath 9, of maintenance tunnels and hybrid signal analysis, and a human hand on Selvari crystal bone, and a violet disc pressed into an open palm, all of it, extracted from her mind, copied, stored on a server in a black market vault, waiting to be sold as leverage against the Selvari dominion. Their private history, packaged as a weapon. The Pale Circuit's response team arrived 7 minutes later. Kale heard them before he saw them, boots on metal, the whine of charged weapons, the clipped communication cadence of professionals who killed for money and slept well afterward. His team fell into defensive positions. The 2 Marines covered the vault entrance. The Selvari officer anchored the left flank. Kale and Salith held the server core. The firefight was brief and brutal. Pulse fire scorched the air. A server tower exploded 10 meters to Kale's left, showering the corridor with crystalline shrapnel. One of the Marines took a hit to the shoulder and kept firing with his offhand, because human stubbornness was not just an emotional trait, it was a combat doctrine. In the chaos, Kale's unpartitioned memory became the only reliable navigation system on the team. He remembered the satellite's layout from the schematics he'd studied. But more than that, he remembered her. Her movement patterns, her instinctive positioning, the way she broke right when he broke left, creating overlapping fields of fire that no training manual had ever documented, because they'd been invented in real time on a dead moon by two people who had learned to think as one organism. The Pale Circuit's operatives were good. Kale and Salith were something older and stranger, a partnership encoded in human scar tissue and Selvari crystal, sealed away for a decade and now burning through them like a fever that had never broken. In the middle of the firefight, Salith's partition collapsed. Not cracked, not leaked, collapsed. The sealed room inside her mind blew open like a pressurized door, and 11 weeks of quarantined memory flooded into her active consciousness in a single, unfiltered wave. She did not stop fighting. Her hands kept moving, her aim stayed true. Her tactical responses were precise and lethal, and delivered with the crystalline efficiency that made the Selvari terrifying in combat. But her bioluminescence went completely, violently wrong, cycling through colors that Kale had never seen, colors that the Selvari visible spectrum was not supposed to include, colors that erupted from her crystalline bones like a language she had forgotten she could speak. She was remembering all of it at once while clearing a room. Kale watched it happen from 6 meters away, and the only thing he could do was what he had always done: stay close, cover her flank, and carry the weight of this moment alongside her, because that was what humans did. They didn't partition. They didn't archive. They stood next to the people they loved in the wreckage, and they held on. The vault fell quiet. The Pale Circuit operatives retreated. Kale's team held the core. He stood in front of the 14th server row, the one containing Salith's sealed archive, their 11 weeks, their private history extracted and commodified and stored in humming metal. Salith stood behind him. Her bioluminescence had settled into a deep, steady violet that pulsed with a rhythm Kale recognized, because it matched the crystal disk against his chest. She was looking at the server that held the stolen architecture of everything she'd been made to forget, and her face carried an expression that the narration could only describe through what Kale's hands were doing. They were shaking. Then they were steady. Then shaking again. Then steady. He placed the breaching charge on the server housing, set the timer for 10 seconds, stepped back. The charge detonated with a sound like a bell breaking. The server split. The data inside it, their data, their memories, their 11 weeks of being two people who never should have fit together and did, burned into electromagnetic ash and scattered into nothing. Kale's hands were steady now. Salith watched the smoke clear. She said nothing. Her bioluminescence said everything, a long, low pulse of violet light that filled the vault like a held breath finally released. They returned to Axis Meridian with the communication logs, a wounded Marine, and a silence between Kale and Salith that was not empty but full. Full of things that had been locked away and were now loose in both of them, in his scar tissue, in her restored crystal, in the space between two people who had spent 10 years on opposite sides of a wall that no longer existed. They debriefed separately, different rooms, different floors. 47 meters apart. Kale sat in his debriefing room and answered questions about the operation with precise, professional accuracy. His voice did not waver. His account was thorough. He omitted nothing tactical and everything personal. When they dismissed him, he walked to the corridor outside and stood very still. He could feel her bioluminescence through the station walls, a low violet hum at a frequency that human ears couldn't hear but human bones could feel. It was saying something. It had been saying something for 10 years, sealed behind partitions and classification codes and the professional distance of two people pretending they were strangers. He let it hum, he didn't translate it. Some things you let exist in the frequency where they live. The evidence was irrefutable. Kale stood behind Vera's chair as she presented the communication logs to the full concordance assembly. The data told a clean, damning story. The leaked intelligence about Selvari weapons development had been manufactured by a shadow faction within the Torani military, officers who profited from conflict and feared what peace would cost them. The fabrication chain was traceable. The compression artifacts were distinct. The signal encoding pointed to a specific Torani intelligence cell that had subcontracted the operation to the Pale Circuit, the same black market network that had been harvesting Selvari memory technology for decades. The Torani lead negotiator, Vasek, sat through the presentation with the rigid posture of a man watching his own house burn from across a river. When Vera finished, the chamber was silent in the particular way that rooms go silent when everyone present understands that the ground beneath them has shifted and the old maps are useless. The Velesi mediator spoke first. 4 of her 6 arms were folded. The other 2 were open, palms up. The Velesi gesture for the floor recognizes truth. Earth's delegation has provided evidence of material provocation, she said. This body must respond. What followed was 3 days of political restructuring that would be studied in concordance academies for the next century. The Torani shadow faction was formally identified and isolated. The Torani government, faced with the choice between protecting a rogue cell and preserving 60 years of galactic architecture, chose survival. Vasek delivered a public disavowal that cost him visible years of his life to speak aloud. The Pale Circuit's operations were exposed to the full concordance, forcing every member species to confront what had been an open secret for decades. That Selvari memory technology had been stolen, weaponized, and sold on a galactic black market, while official channels looked the other way. The Selvari delegation, led by Salith, made a decision that stunned the chamber. They agreed to support the declassification of Operation Midnight Garden, the mission that had never officially existed, the 11 weeks that had been buried under 17 layers of secrecy and one princess's sealed memories. It was a political earthquake. Midnight Garden's declassification revealed that a Selvari royal had worked alongside a human soldier in a covert operation, that she had shared cognitive access with him, that the mission had succeeded specifically because of the hybrid human-Selvari partnership, a collaboration so effective it had terrified both governments into burying it. The revelation reframed humanity's position in the concordance overnight. Earth had been the newcomer, the young species, the emotional ones who couldn't shed their attachments and carried every scar like a badge they didn't know how to remove. The galaxy had tolerated humans. It had pitied them. It had used them when their stubbornness was convenient and dismissed them when their feelings were not. Now the concordance looked at the evidence, at the fabricated provocation, the pale circuit, the weaponized memories, and saw a truth that had been hiding in plain sight since first contact. In a galaxy where memory could be extracted, edited, sold, and erased, the species that carried all of it, involuntarily, permanently in their living tissue, was the only species that could not be corrupted. You could not buy a human's memory. You could not partition it. You could not seal it away and pretend it had never existed. A human who witnessed something carried that witness in their bones for the rest of their natural life, and no amount of political pressure or chemical intervention or crystalline cognitive surgery could make them unsee what they had seen. The human scar was not a weakness. It was the most incorruptible form of testimony the galaxy had ever produced. The concordance voted to regulate memory partition technology across all member species. The resonance wells were declared protected territory under joint stewardship. Earth's delegation, small, underfunded, led by a silver-haired ambassador and a flatlined soldier, walked out of the summit as the newest permanent member of the Concordance's inner council. Humanity had earned its seat the only way it knew how, by refusing to forget. Salith found him on the observation deck. The one he'd been avoiding, upper ring of axis meridian panoramic viewport, nothing between the glass and the raw starfield but a thin membrane of engineered transparency. Open dark. The kind of space that made a person feel either infinite or erased, depending on what they were carrying. Cale was standing at the viewport with his hands in his pockets, and his weight on both feet, and his face turned toward a stretch of darkness that contained, somewhere in its depths, a brown dwarf and a dead moon, and the ruins of a weapons facility where two people had once built something that neither species knew how to name. She stood beside him, close enough that if he shifted his weight, his shoulder would brush her arm. He didn't shift his weight. She didn't step away. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The station hummed around them, atmospheric processors, gravitational compensators, the quiet mechanical breathing of a place designed to keep living things alive in the void. Salith's bioluminescence was low and violet, pulsing in a rhythm that had nothing to do with diplomacy, and everything to do with the 11 weeks that were no longer sealed behind a wall she didn't know existed. "My people believe that partitioning is strength," she said. Her voice was quiet. Not fragile. Selvari voices were never fragile. Their vocal structures were crystalline and carried sound like tuning forks. But the words were chosen with the kind of care that suggested each one had been tested for weight before being spoken aloud. "We believe that the ability to archive pain, to seal away what wounds us, is what makes us endure." She paused. Her light flickered once violet to something deeper, then back. "We are wrong." Cale didn't move, didn't turn. His eyes stayed on the dark. "We partition because we are too fragile to carry what you carry," she said. "Your species absorbs every wound, every bond, every loss into your living cells, and you continue to function. You do not seal it away. You do not dissolve the key. You carry the full weight of every person you have ever cared about. And you walk into rooms and do your work and make your terrible coffee and save people from falling ceiling panels. And the entire time you are holding more grief and love and memory in your body than any Selvari could survive unpartitioned." She turned to face him. Her bioluminescence was fully violet now, deep, steady, uncontrolled. The color of an unguarded mind. The color of a Selvari who had stopped performing composure and was simply standing in the truth of what she felt. "The human scar is not a defect, Cale. His name, not his title, not commander, not human. His name, spoken by a voice that had once said it in the dark on a dead moon, and was now saying it again in the open, in the light, in a room with a window that looked out on everything. It is the most frightening thing in the galaxy." He took the crystal disc out of his pocket. It sat in his palm, pale violet, worn smooth by 10 years of three-circle greetings pressed into its surface through the fabric of uniform jackets. The Selvarin, the bonding token, the small, impossible object that a young intelligence officer had placed in a human soldier's hand on the 9th week of a mission that was never supposed to produce anything worth keeping. He held it out to her. Salith looked at it, then at him, then at the disc again. She reached out and closed his fingers back around it, her crystalline hand over his human hand, pressing the Selvarin into his palm with a deliberateness that was not refusal but something older and more specific. A Selvari gesture that existed in no diplomatic manual and required no translation. "This belongs where it has been carried." She did not explain the gesture. He did not ask. Cale stood at the viewport for a while longer after she left. The observation deck was quiet. The stars did their ancient, indifferent work of burning in the dark, and the station turned beneath them, and somewhere in its corridors, delegates and officers and advisors were beginning the complicated machinery of a new galactic order. He looked at the open dark. It did not press against his chest. He counted the exits. 1 door, 1 corridor. He noted this out of habit, then stopped counting, because the habit had been built by a man who always needed to know how to leave, and Cale was not sure he was that man anymore. The crystal disc hummed against his palm. Low, warm, violet. a frequency that sat below human hearing and above human silence, in the narrow band where things that mattered lived without needing to be said. Ambassador Vera found him 15 minutes later. She walked onto the observation deck with her datapad under her arm and the particular expression of a woman who had just changed the trajectory of human history and needed someone to be normal about it. "Shuttle's in 20, she said. "Earth calls." He nodded, pocketed the crystal. Vera looked at him, really looked the way she had in the corridor on the fourth day when she'd asked if he was compromised and he'd said no with a voice like a closing door. She was reading him again, finding something different this time. "You look different," she said. He didn't answer. She didn't push. Vera had been navigating silence professionally for 3 decades, and she recognized the kind that wasn't hiding something but simply holding it, the way a hand holds a stone it has decided to keep. They walked out together, through the corridor, past the conference rooms, past the atrium where a delegation of crystalline beings had walked through doors 6 days ago and rearranged the architecture of a man who thought he'd finished being rearranged. The shuttle bay was bright and industrial and smelled like engine coolant. Cale crossed the threshold and felt the crystal disk hum once against his thigh, a single low pulse, like a goodbye that wasn't a goodbye, like a frequency that would carry across whatever distance the galaxy put between its source and its receiver. He carried it the way his species carried everything. Without permission. Without partition. Without end.